When I was a child, my family often spent the weekends or the holidays at my grandmother's house. As a typical traditional Malay house, it was made out of wood and quite huge. Not a surprise since my father does have a lot of siblings. There were 9 of them. It wasn't just my immediate family. Most weekends or holidays, even my uncles and aunt would be there too along with their family. Sometimes, there will be around 50 to 70 of us inside the house. It was truly one of my fondest memories where the entire huge family will sit together to have dinner or celebrate birthdays. One day, my grandmother fell sick. The doctor simply told us that her health was deteriorating since she was quite old at that time but requires no hospitalization. My dad and his siblings all made up their mind that my grandmother should stay with them. Every month, she would stay with one of her children's houses. I remember she stayed the most at my house since it was the biggest at that time. I was happy since she was a great storyteller and a great cook. In the meantime, my father and uncles hired a nearby neighbor to take care of and clean my grandmother's house every once in a while. Unfortunately, her health continues to decline. She told my father that she wants to stay in her old home. At first, we didn't like the idea with her being alone in that house, especially with her declining health. After much discussion, my eldest uncle decided to build a house directly in front of my grandmother's house to stay. In the meantime, they will rent a nearby house so he or my cousins could visit her every day. My father and his siblings also agreed to hire a nanny for my grandmother so she won't be alone. Fortunately, despite no one had been staying in the house for about 2 years, the house was relatively clean. It had been almost a week since my grandmother returned to her own house. The weekend was coming and my father decided to bring back the tradition of staying at my grandmother's. That Friday night, around 20 of us were there, and that was the night when strange things began to happen. The first to notice something was off was my cousins. They were all daughters of my dad's youngest sibling. They were always cheerful, but at that time, I remember their face was almost always looking terrified. I chalk it up as kids being kids, which was ironic since I was around 10 at that time. Then as I walked past their bedroom, I heard through the thin wall that the girls complained to their parents that they noticed a few shadowy figures had been all over the house. My uncle tried to convince them that it was just their imagination. I decided not to care much since I was too tired and sleepy. That night while I was sleeping, I remember waking up, staring above, and saw something terrifying. Just so you know, a traditional Malay house rarely has a ceiling. The house beam was exposed and you can see the inside layer of the roof. During my sudden awake, I saw something like a shadow sitting at the house beam. I had to rub my eyes to see, and after a while, I began to see what it was. It was a creature or something. Am I still dreaming? I thought to myself. I was utterly terrified. I can see the creature, but it was like my brain failed to see how it exactly looked like. Sometimes it looks like a lion, then a crocodile, then a huge bird or something. Then it looks at me. All I could remember was its huge red eyes and a wide grin filled with fangs. I tried to scream, but my voice stuck at my throat and my body felt stiff like I was paralyzed. All I could do was slowly pull up the blanket and hide my body underneath it and forced myself to sleep, hoping that it was a nightmare. The following day, I simply sat alone at the stairs, trying to get rid of the memories of what happened. Then from the corner of my eyes, I could sense that someone or something had been peeking out from the toilet area, looking at the living room. It looks like as if it was a child or simply the size of a child with pale gray skin. On your screen is the image to show half of the layout of the house. I was sitting at the stairs that was in the living room. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but it happened throughout the day and nights. Then I heard my aunts talking with each other. It turns out that I wasn't the only one who noticed it. The entire family saw it too. Or rather, we could only see it from the corner of our eyes. When we all tried to turn to look at it directly, it simply disappeared. Some decided to check it out themselves, and yet nothing was there. My uncle quietly told us that when a house was abandoned, there will always something that will live there. The house was abandoned for about 2 years, so obviously something did came and we all were simply intruders. He told us that if we didn't bother them, they will not bother us. That night, we all prayed together as well as recite some holy prayers. Yet, I could still see the little stalker and I could begin to notice a few shadows around the house that does not belong to the furnitures or the livings. Worst for me was that night. I have woken up again. This time, the thing was already grinning at me with what I assumed the hand poking my cheek. It didn't feel solid at all, it felt more like a cloud of smoke. Again, I tried to scream, but my body felt stiff. Like before, I could only slowly pull my blanket to cover my head and forced myself to sleep. I never dared to sleep at that house ever again. Every time we went back to my grandmother's house during either weekends or holidays, I simply stay at my uncle's house that was right in front of it. Yet, every time I entered the house, I could still sense that small figure poking out its head from the toilet bowl and the shadows that move around the house. My grandmother passed away around 8 years ago, and since then, we never have a reason to stay at that house ever again. Now the house was downsized while I was at university. It still has the original layout of the lower area. They only got rid of the upper area. I asked my father why not simply demolish the entire building. He then told me that even getting rid of the upper area was difficult. Workers were pushed by nothing and electronics and engines will always malfunction. In the end, they decided not to touch the bottom area and use it as a storage. The following is my account of what occurred in the woods while hiking a couple of days ago. After lots of frustrating research, I haven't come any closer to explaining my experience. Hopefully, somebody who had similar experience or knows what they're talking about stumbles upon this. I don't post often, but I figured someone here may be able to help me out. Tuesday afternoon, I decided to take advantage of the nice weather and go for a little hike. I wanted to explore a nature preserve I had only previously explored briefly. This nature preserve happened to be nestled between a cemetery, a church or school, and a mental health hospital. After about 30 minutes of uneventful walking in the woods, I came across a slightly developed area. Tucked down a hill and in the middle of the forest, I was shocked to find a paved area and a couple isolated concrete walls. A feeling of adventure and discovery took over and I instantly became excited to explore. When I stepped close to the paved area, things started to change. I started to feel a little uneasy but didn't pay much attention to it. When I made it to the paved area, I became confused. There was an empty metal chair sitting in the middle of the clearing on the concrete. Part of me was fascinated as I thought this looked cool and creepy. I snapped a quick picture too to capture the moment. After staring for a minute, I decided to investigate the chair. However, I again got an uneasy feeling when I got closer to the chair. Due to this, I decided it would be best to not explore that area today. I slowly turned and began to walk off as I quietly said, "Man, this place is creepier than I remembered." This was when my experience occurred, almost like someone responded to me. I heard a loud and direct, "Nobody likes it here." I quickly whipped around to scan for the person. Based on the voice, it would have been about a 5 or 8-year-old boy. However, when I turned around, there was no one there. The likely explanation would have been some kid just playing in the woods. This doesn't add up though. There was only one path in and out of the area and I was standing on it. I also didn't see any other person the whole time I was there. The absence of another person or any real route in or out suddenly hit me. My concern quickly changed to fear. I took a last look only to see nothing before I started sprinting up the path and out of the woods. I eventually caught my breath but still had no explanation. Even after I heard the voice, there was no movement that I would have expected to hear from a person. I've never had anything close to a paranormal encounter before and have always been pretty skeptical. Now I don't know what to think. I can't rationalize the voice or the situation at all. Historical research hasn't given me any special leads. Please let me know if anyone else had or heard of a similar experience. Any information is greatly appreciated. When I was little, probably around the age bracket of 10 to 14 years old, I was pretty much living with my best friend Jackie at the time. We never left each other's side for more than a day, it felt like, and everyone at that point basically just thought we were sisters. Her mom was the best person I had ever met and still is, so I absolutely loved being at her house. That is until I started experiencing things there. Her mom used to tell us ghost stories before we went to sleep because we loved that shit. By the time that I was around 6, I was already watching Nightmare on Elm Street, if that gives you any indication on how much I love anything horror related. Anyways, I never really thought much of her stories because I was young and who cares, right? Wrong. Jackie's mom knew that the house they lived in was for sure haunted, and I just thought the stories she was telling us were made up. Wrong again. Now, before I get into what Jackie's parents have experienced in that house, let me tell you what I have personally experienced. My first experience I remember was when I was sleeping at her house one night. Jackie's room was all the way at the very end of the hall, and if you kept her bedroom door open, you could see straight down the other end of the hall. It is absolutely terrifying regardless if the house was haunted because who the hell wants to sleep in a complete total darkness of a hallway when you're sleeping? Well, apparently Jackie did because she slept with her door room open every single night. So, I'm fast asleep, probably dreaming about some weird things, when all of a sudden I wake up and automatically feel very off. I almost felt like as if someone was watching me from somewhere in the bedroom. Jackie has an alarm clock on my side of the bed, so I look over to check the time and, of course, guess what time is it? It's 3 in the morning. So I lay there for a minute and try to calm my breathing, but something in my mind is telling me that I need to look down the hallway. Did I want to look down the hallway? Hell no. Did I end up looking down the hallway? Unfortunately. I sat up in the bed just a little bit and mustered up the courage to finally look in this dark abyss, and what do I see? A figure that is darker than the pitch black darkness of the hallway, just standing there. Not moving. Not making any sound. Just a human shadow standing perfectly still, staring right into the bedroom where we were sleeping. And what do I do as a little kid? Put that blanket over my head like it's somehow gonna protect me from the ghost. Regardless, I somehow fell back asleep because all I remember is waking up the next morning. Obviously, that didn't stop me from coming over there when, hello, it should have. Encounter number 2. Another night of waking up at 3 in the morning. This time, to a piano playing. Luckily, Jackie happened to wake up at the exact same time as me. Still kind of weird to this day. We both slowly sat up and sat there and listened to this piano playing that started off very softly at first. It almost sounded like it was miles away, but also in the same room. Minute after minute, this piano started to get louder. It sounded like it was coming from the bedroom, but also nowhere near us at the same time. At this point, we were pretty much holding each other for dear life because the music started to become almost deafening. Then, with no warning at all, bam! Nothing. The music completely stopped and it was dead silent. Then we heard it.
Hello?
Right in between our heads. Of course, we both screamed bloody murder and her mom had to check on us because we were both having panic attacks. But once again, that didn't stop me from coming back over. Truthfully, I deserve these experiences because my god, I was a dumbass child to keep coming back over. Encounter 3. This is my final encounter. Me and Jackie were home alone because her mom and dad were at work. I think we were 13 at this time. Jackie's mom had engraved it in our heads that everything had to be turned off when we left the house for any reason. TVs, radios, computers, and so on and so forth. So before we left the house to go play basketball in the driveway, we turned everything off per usual. We played outside for maybe an hour or so. After we're done playing, we walked back up to the door, and right before I put my hand on the knob to turn it, voices. Many voices. It sounds like a group of people just having a conversation inside. Me and Jackie sat there and listened for a minute and tried to tell ourselves that we just probably left the TV on. So I opened the door. As soon as my hand turns the knob, nothing. The voices stopped like no one was even there. We checked everything. TVs, radios, computers. Everything was off. I know this is getting to be a long one, so I'll save you all the stories of Jackie's mom, but I will mention one of them that still scares me to this day. According to her mom, one night she was sleeping and was woken up by screaming. A woman was literally screaming, "Help me!" Jackie's mom said it was such a loud scream and a cry for help that it gave her chills. She immediately shot out of bed and was checking throughout the whole house because she said it sounded like it was coming from every corner. She eventually went out to the backyard to check outside, and as soon as she opened the back door, you guessed it, nothing. Complete silence. The even weirder thing is, her husband was sleeping right next to her. He never heard a thing. They ended up selling the house. Once the house was sold and the new owners had it for a few weeks, they actually ended up calling Jackie's mom and asked her if they had ever experienced anything weird in the house because they were having things happen. It's crazy. I still pass by the house sometimes and it sends chills down my spine. Knowing what I know now, and also me being a 23-year-old adult with common sense, I would never and could never go back into that house. It's a hard no for me all day, every day. Thanks for letting me share this long story and share it somewhere where I know I'll be taken seriously. In all my years of having a deep fascination with the paranormal, such as ghosts, aliens, cryptids, and generally anything unexplained, I've only ever had one encounter that I still cannot explain. Due to a roommate bailing out on our lease, I was forced to shack up with a buddy of mine and his wife. It was a small 2-bedroom apartment, but he welcomed me with open arms. They had a toddler that the second room was for, but they said she never goes in there and she sleeps with them every night, so it was no problem to take the room for my own. A couple of weeks went by with no incident. However, I did notice the room was a good 10 degrees cooler than the rest of the house at all times. No problem, I'll just wrap myself up in the blankets. I've always been a heavy sleeper, so it takes me some time to wake up in the morning as I zombie around for a good hour first. One particular night, I woke out of my sleep and lifted my head to adjust the pillow. As soon as I did, I noticed something in the far corner of the room. The entire room was lit with moonlight except for one dark silhouette of a human form standing in the corner, staring at me. This figure had no features beside the dark outlining of a broad-shouldered man standing, watching. It may have been my grogginess, but he was very tall as well, with his head almost touching the ceiling. Due to 90% still asleep, I didn't acknowledge what I had seen and fell back asleep on my newly adjusted pillow. The next morning, as I awoke to a much brighter sunlit room, I remembered what I saw last night and the form standing in my room. After a quick glance at the same corner, I shrugged it off as a dream and went on with my life. A couple more months went by with no more shadowy figures staring at me, or at least that I was consciously aware of. I was going to be moving to my new place with my then girlfriend, and we were just waiting for the lease to start. One night during the wait, I encountered the silhouette man one more time. The details of the encounter were exactly the same. I awoke, adjusted my pillow, saw the giant shadow staring at me, thought nothing of it, and drifted off to sleep. Once again to repeat my encounter to the letter, I woke the next morning, remembering what I saw and quickly darted my eyes to the corner. Okay, there has to be something to this. Moving day arrived, and I decided to tell my buddy, who was gracious enough to let me stay, my two encounters with the silhouette. His reaction surprised me. He said, "Yeah, our daughter doesn't go in there and just points to the room saying, 'scary man,' when she gets close to it." He told me this as if it was no big deal. I answered him sarcastically. "Now you tell me." We continued with the move. I've never had a ghost experience before or after that, and it's my one little talking point to others who are interested in the same paranormal stories as I am. His presence has always stuck in my mind, though. I even put him in one of my short horror stories when I first started writing. Of course, that story was fictional. This one is not.